Let's let some folks in here. Hi. One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ugh.
Hey, Mr. McClellan. That's going good. I just read a story that was way too wholesome.
You read it or you wrote it?
Read it.
Okay.
Read a story that was way too wholesome.
Why
I
was
was just
it
sad
too-
for a little. Huh?
Why was it too wholesome? Like, what was it about?
Oh, sure. It was a manga I read, like, would you still love me if we were reincarnated? And I read it. I'm like, oh, this is too wholesome.
Where is James?
I'm
James,
like, okay.
trying to get these people. All right, James and Alyssa, where are they? It's only just now 10:57. I can hold my horses for a minute. See if they show up.
Hey, Mr. McClellan, what did I do wrong with that image poem?
The only thing I wouldn't say you did anything necessarily wrong, but I do feel like, and you're not the only person that this is applicable to, but of the poems that I read, there were really only a couple that I felt were like really imagery. Like, I obviously got a picture in my head of cards, but it was more like just a list of cards rather than like actually putting the picture in my head, like describing the cards or like the way that they fan out or something, you know? It's more just like a list than actually putting an image in my head. Does that make sense?
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, I get it. Next time we do this, I can do better. Thanks.
Oh, I'm confident. And I still have not received a poem from several people. So you are guilty, but I got an email about you today and your computer issues, and we can do a historical grade change for you. So if you want to get the essay turned in as soon as you can, then I'll take that from quarter 3 and we can change your grade. Yeah.
And do you still, and then it was that a poem that you gave us last week also?
Yes, that's on quarter 4. So it's, you know, not any kind of big deal to take that, but. Well, I'm just so curious where everyone else could possibly be. Mostly.
It's 11 o'clock.
Thank you. James and Alyssa. Anybody like Cece or anybody know what's happened to Alexis? She hasn't been around in a long time. Just getting a little concerned about her. Okay, so today we're going to read another story. The other day we read one by Ernest Hemingway. And I would say he's one of like the big 3 authors of modernism. Here comes James. Hi, James.
Hello.
Go back and fix your attendance. Ernest Hemingway is one of the like big 3 authors of modernism, if I've got to narrow it down. F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, is another one. We'll be starting that week after next. And the third one is William Faulkner, and he's who we're going to read today. This story is a little bit longer than the Ernest Hemingway one, both in page count and in every other way, like sentence length, the length of time that it takes place over. I I used to kind of, I'm sorry, I'm like trying to eat almonds, but then like almonds get in your throat. So I'm like, I used to get into arguments with one of my good friends who's not a teacher, but a literary person. She was like a bookseller for a long time. Because I really like Hemingway and she really likes Faulkner and she doesn't like Hemingway and I don't really like Faulkner, but this is my favorite story of his probably. And I was like, I just like that Hemingway says everything really simply, like anyone could read his stuff and understand it. It's just very accessible. And she's like, no, I don't like that. It's too stark. It's too stark. And I just want all the language. I just want to like have all the language. I'm like, I think I could use some editing. So we're going to read this story today. And then tomorrow you'll have a short assignment, kind of comparing the two and the styles and stuff. So just keep that in mind as we're reading. I did a dumb thing yesterday. It felt smart at the time, but in hindsight, it was dumb, which is that I planned out every class from here to the end of the year. And that helps me feel organized, but I know it's very dumb because stuff always gets in the way. I told that to my second period class and Brendan Freeman just like laughed at me and he was like, something literally happened Monday, like Tuesday, like threw off your whole plan. So I don't know why you're doing that. And fair enough. But I have a plan all set and ready to go. So tomorrow we'll do a short assignment about this. And then next week will be the Moby Dick stuff. And then the week after that, we'll start The Great Gatsby. So we do kind of have to like take a little pause on modernism for next week to do all of the good Moby Dick stuff, but we'll get back to it the next week. Here comes Alyssa.
No.
Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
hi, Miss McClellan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm going to Florida.
What?
Yeah, I'm leaving today at 11:30. I'm going to go meet new family that I haven't met before.
Oh, well, that's kind of cool. What part of Florida?
Amelia Island.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
I've been there.
No,
It's really cool.
sick.
So I was just explaining, I'm sorry, I'm like talking my mouth full. I'm just trying to eat a couple almonds. We read the Ernest Hemingway story yesterday or the day before, whenever. And today we're going to read William Faulkner, which is one of the other big authors from modernism. And then tomorrow you'll have a short assignment kind of comparing the two stories. So
what happened to us reading Moby Dick this week?
if you'll recall, on Tuesday, it didn't work. Like when I went to do the website, it didn't work. And like all day yesterday, I was struggling. Well, Tuesday and yesterday, I was trying to work it out with both the people who own the theater company and with Mike to see if there was anything we could do. And it finally is working now, but I'd rather just like tackle it all in 1 week. So we're just going to do it next week.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so that's imagery. This story is right here. A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. I'm going to open it up separately. Still short, just not as short as the Hemingway story. It would be hard to be shorter than that one. Would anybody like to read?
No, I'm taking a week off. I
Okay.
read all the time. Every single time.
All right, I'll read. A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. Has anybody read this story before, first of all? I didn't know if maybe with you.
A big, probably at one point in time, probably.
Okay. We'll see. I feel like this is one that I read like a couple of times during high school. And it's just one that gets like anthologized a lot. We can talk about why. All right. When Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. The men through a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument, the women mostly out of curiosity to see the inside of her house, which no one, save an old manservant, a combined gardener and cook, had seen in at least 10 years. It was a big squarish frame house that had once been white, decorated with cupolas and spires and scrolled balconies in the heavy lightsome style of the 70s, set on what had once been our most select street. And by the 70s, it would have meant the 1870s. But garages and cotton gins had encroached and obliterated even the August names of that neighborhood. Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. And now Miss Emily had gone to join the representatives of those August names where they lay in the cedar bemused cemetery among the ranked and anonymous graves of Union and Confederate soldiers who fell at the Battle of Jefferson. Alive, Miss Emily had been a tradition, a duty, and a care, a sort of hereditary obligation upon the town, dating from that day in 1894, when Colonel Sartoris, the mayor, he who fathered the edict that no Negro woman should appear on the streets without an apron, remitted her taxes, the dispensation dating from the death of her father on into perpetuity, which means forever. Not that Miss Emily would have accepted charity. Colonel Sartoris invented an involved tale to the effect that Miss Emily's father had loaned money to the town, which the town, as a matter of business, preferred this way of repaying. Only a man of Colonel Sartoris's generation and thought could have invented it, and only a woman could have believed it. I don't know how I feel about that. When the next generation, with its more modern ideas, became mayors and aldermen, this arrangement created some little dissatisfaction. On the first of the year, they mailed her a tax notice. February came and there was no reply. They wrote her a formal letter asking her to call at the sheriff's office at her convenience. A week later, the mayor wrote her himself, offering to call or send his car for her, and received in reply a note on paper of an archaic shape in a thin, flowing calligraphy in faded ink, to the effect that she no longer went out at all. The tax notice was also enclosed without comment. They called a special meeting of the Board of Aldermen. A deputation waited upon her, knocked at the door through which no visitor had passed since she ceased giving china painting lessons 8 or 10 years earlier. They were admitted by the old Negro into a dim hall from which a stairway mounted into still more shadow. It smelled of dust and disuse, a close, dank smell. The Negro led them into the parlor. It was furnished in heavy, leather-covered furniture. When the Negro opened the blinds of one window, they could see that the leather was cracked, and when they sat down, a faint dust rose sluggishly about their thighs, spinning with slow motes in the single sun ray. On a tarnished gilt easel before the fireplace stood a crayon portrait of Miss Emily's father. Crayon probably meant a different thing back then. It was probably like oil pastel or something. It's not like Crayolas. That would be weird to have a crayon portrait. They rose when she entered, a small, fat woman in black with a thin gold chain descending to her waist and vanishing into her belt, leaning on an ebony cane with a tarnished gold head. Her skeleton was small and spare. Perhaps that's why what would have been merely plumpness in another was obesity in her. She looked bloated, like a body long submerged in motionless water, and of that pallid hue. Her eyes, lost in the fatty ridges of her face, looked like two small pieces of coal pressed into a lump of dough as they moved from one face to another, while the visitors stated their errand. It's not very surprising that she would be like obese if she has not left her house in a very long time. Not that if you don't leave your house, you will become obese, but for the record, those of us who, you know, really paid attention to quarantine over last summer, I can't count how many people, including myself, are like, oh man, I definitely put on like the quarantine 15. So like not leaving your house for a long time, definitely, it doesn't really inspire you to like get up and move a whole lot. She did not ask them to sit. She just stood in the door and listened quietly until the spokesman came to a stumbling halt. Then they could hear the invisible watch ticking at the end of the gold chain. Her voice was dry and cold. I have no taxes in Jefferson. Colonel Sartoris explained it to me. Perhaps one of you can gain access to the city records and satisfy yourselves. But we are the city authorities, Miss Emily. Didn't you get a notice from the sheriff signed by him? I received a paper, yes, Miss Emily said. Perhaps he considers himself the sheriff. I have no taxes in Jefferson. But there's nothing on the books to show that. You see, we must go by the see Colonel Sartoris. I have no taxes in Jefferson. But Miss Emily, see Colonel Sartoris. Colonel Sartoris had been dead almost 10 years. I have no taxes in Jefferson. Tobe, the Negro appeared. Show these gentlemen out. Part 2. So she vanquished them, horse and foot, just as she had vanquished their fathers 30 years before, about the smell. So we're kind of like flashing back here a little bit. That was 2 years after her father's death, and a short time after her sweetheart, the one we believed would marry her, had deserted her. After her father's death, she went out very little. After her sweetheart went away, people hardly saw her at all. A few of the ladies had the temerity to call, but were not received, and the only sign of life about the place was the Negro man, a young man then, going in and out with a market basket. Just as if a man, any man, could keep a kitchen properly, the lady said. So they were not surprised when the smell developed. It was another link between the gross, teeming world and the high and mighty Griersons. So like beforehand, before her father died and her sweetheart went away, she was sort of like a big deal in the town. They were rich, and you know, the plight of common people didn't really touch them. But now that she's been alone in her house for so long, there's this smell around the house. And I mean, women are like, well, she's only got that one male servant, so like men don't really know how to keep a house, but also they're, you know, a little bit satisfied to see her sort of like knock down a peg. A neighbor, a woman, complained to the mayor, Judge Stevens, 80 years old. But what will you have me do about it, madam? He said. Well, I sent her word to stop it, the woman said. Isn't there a law? I'm sure that won't be necessary, Judge Stevens said. It's probably just a snake or a rat that man of hers killed in the yard. I'll speak to him about it. The next day, he received 2 more complaints, one from a man who came in definite deprecation. We really must do something about it, Judge. I'd be the last one in the world to bother Miss Emily, but we've got to do something. That night, the Board of Aldermen met, 3 graybeards and 1 younger man, a member of the rising generation. It's simple enough, he said. Send her word to have her place cleaned up. Give her a certain time to do it in, and if she don't, damn it, sir, Judge Stevens said, will you accuse a lady to her face of smelling bad? I mean, how embarrassing. So the next night after midnight, 4 men crossed Miss Emily's lawn and slunk about the house like burglars, sniffing along the base of the brickwork and at the cellar openings, while one of them performed a regular sewing motion with his hand out of a sack slung from his shoulder. They broke open the cellar door and sprinkled lime there and in all the outbuildings. As they recrossed the lawn, a window that had been dark was lighted and Miss Emily sat in it, the light behind her and her upright torso motionless as that of an idol. They crept quickly across the lawn and into the shadow of the locusts that lined the streets. After a week or 2, the smell went away. That was when people had begun to feel really sorry for her. People in our town, remembering how old Lady Wyatt, her great aunt, had gone completely crazy at last, believed that the Griersons held themselves a little too high for what they really were. None of the young men were quite good enough for Miss Emily and such. We'd long thought of them as a tableau, Miss Emily a slender figure in white in the background, her father a spraddled silhouette in the foreground, his back to her and clutching a horsewhip, the 2 of them framed by the back-flung front door. So when she got to be 30 and was still single, we were not pleased exactly, but vindicated. Even with the insanity in the family, she wouldn't have turned down all of her chances if they had really materialized. So people feel a little bit satisfied that she gets to be 30 years old, which back then was a big deal, and not married. They were like, well, it's not exactly, we don't really think it's such a shame. Like, again, it was one of those things like they deserve to be taken down a peg. When her father died, it got about that the house was all that was left to her. And in a way, people were glad. At last they could pity Miss Emily. Being left alone and a pauper, she had become humanized. Now she too would know the old thrill and the old despair of a penny more or less. The day after his death, all the ladies prepared to call at the house and offer condolence and aid, as is our custom. Miss Emily met them at the door, dressed as usual and with no trace of grief on her face. She told them that her father was not dead. She did that for 3 days, with the ministers calling on her and the doctors trying to persuade her to let them dispose of the body. Just as they were about to resort to law and force, she broke down and they buried her father quickly. We did not say she was crazy then. We believed she had to do that. We remembered all the young men her father had driven away, and we knew that with nothing left, she would have to cling to that which had robbed her, as people will. So her dad was like one of the reasons that she didn't get married. He kind of like scared off a lot of people, and like people didn't want to pursue her because of him. But then when he died, first of all, she was like in denial for several days, and then just sort of like clung to the idea of him. He was really like the only man in her life. Part 3. She was sick for a long time. When we saw her again, her hair was cut short, making her look like a girl with a vague resemblance to those angels in colored church windows, sort of tragic and serene. The town had just let the contracts for paving the sidewalks, and in the summer after her father's death, they began the work. The construction company came with riggers and mules and machinery, and a foreman named Homer Barron, a Yankee, a big, dark, ruddy man with a big voice and eyes lighter than his face. The little boys would follow in groups to hear him cuss the riggers, and the riggers singing in time to the rise and fall of picks. Pretty soon, he knew everybody in town. Whenever you heard a lot of laughing anywhere about the square, Homer Barron would be in the center of the group. Presently, we began to see him and Miss Emily on Sunday afternoons driving in the yellow-wheeled buggy and the matched team of bays from the livery stable. All right, Miss Emily getting a boyfriend. At first, we were glad that Miss Emily would have an interest because the ladies all said, of course, a Grierson would not think seriously of a northerner, a day laborer. But there were still others, older people, who said that even grief could not cause a real lady to forget noblesse oblige without calling it noblesse oblige. And I forget what that means. They just said, poor Emily, her kinsfolk should come to her. She had some kin in Alabama, but years ago, her father had fallen out with them over the estate of old lady Wyatt, the crazy woman, and there was no communication between the two families. They had not even been represented at the funeral. And as soon as the old people said, poor Emily, the whispering began. Do you suppose it's really so? They said to one another. Of course it is. What else could this behind their hands, rustling of crane silk and satin behind jalousies closed upon the sun of the Sunday afternoon as the thin, swift clop, clop, clop of the match team passed. Poor Emily. She carried her head high enough, even when we believed that she was fallen. It was as if she demanded more than ever the recognition of her dignity as the last Grierson, as if it had wanted that touch of earthiness to reaffirm her imperviousness. Like when she bought the rat poison, the arsenic. That was over a year after they had begun to say poor Emily, and while the two female cousins were visiting her. I want some poison, she said to the druggist. She was over 30 then, still a slight woman, though thinner than usual, with cold, haughty black eyes and a face the flesh of which was strained across the temples and about the eye sockets as you imagine a lighthouse keeper's face ought to look. I want some poison, she said. Yes, Miss Emily, what kind? For rats and such? I want the best you have. I don't care what kind. The druggist named several. They'll kill anything up to an elephant. But what you want is arsenic, Miss Emily said. Is that a good one? Is arsenic? Yes, ma'am. But what you want, I want arsenic. The druggist looked down at her. She looked back at him, erect, her face like a strained flag. Why, of course, the druggist said, if that's what you want. But the law requires you to tell what you're going to use it for. Miss Emily just stared at him, her head tilted back in order to look him eye for eye until he looked away and went and got the arsenic and wrapped it up. The Negro delivery boy brought her the package. The druggist didn't come back. When she opened the package at home, there was written on the box under the skull and bones, for rats. So the fact that she's getting this poison and not telling anybody why she has it is a little bit suspicious. And I mean, if you could kind of look ahead to this next part, people think she's going to kill herself. But we know that she doesn't, because when the story opens, she's like this fat old lady who's been inside her house for 10 years or however long. So what is she going to do with the rat poison? Let's find out. Part 4. So the next day we all said she will kill herself, and we said it would be the best thing. My God, it's awful. When she had first begun to be seen with Homer Barron, we had said she will marry him. Then we said she will persuade him yet, because Homer himself had remarked he liked men, and it was known that he drank with the younger men in the Elks Club, that he was not a marrying man. Later we said, poor Emily, behind the jalousies as they passed on Sunday afternoon, in the glittering buggy, Miss Emily with her head high, and Homer Barron with his hat cocked and a cigar in his teeth, reins and whip in a yellow glove. Then some of the ladies began to say that it was a disgrace to the town and a bad example to the young people. The men did not want to interfere, but at last the ladies forced the Baptist minister, Miss Emily's people were Episcopal, to call upon her. He would never divulge what happened during that interview, but he refused to go back again. The next Sunday, they again drove about the streets, and the following day, the minister's wife wrote to Miss Emily's relations in Alabama. Honestly, it's crazy how like the whole town is so invested in her relationship or lack thereof. Like everybody's kind of just all in each other's business, which like William Faulkner is a Southern author, and like small Southern towns can be like that, but usually maybe back then it was to this extent, but like not nearly so much now. So like they're all like, oh, she's finally got a guy, she's finally gonna get married, and they don't, and they're like, well, maybe she can persuade him. But the guy had said that he was not a marrying man, and like secretly it says he liked men and he would like drink with younger men at the Elks Club. So like he's probably not going to marry her. So she had bloodkin under her roof again, and we sat back to watch developments. At first, nothing happened. Then we were sure that they were to be married. We learned that Miss Emily had been to the jeweler's and ordered a man's toilet set in silver with the letters HB on each piece. 2 days later, we learned that she had bought a complete outfit of men's clothing, including a nightshirt, and we said, they are married. We were really glad. We were glad because the two female cousins were even more Grierson than Miss Emily had ever been, meaning they're like, you know, kind of snobby and highfalutin, and they'd rather them leave town. So we were not surprised when Homer Barron, the streets had been finished sometime since, was gone. We were a little disappointed that there was not a public blowing off, but we believed that he had gone on to prepare for Miss Emily's coming or to give her a chance to get rid of the cousins. So they think that they've been married secretly and that he has left town to like get his house ready for Emily to come live with him or whatever. By that time, it was a cabal, and we were all Miss Emily's allies to help circumvent the cousins. Sure enough, after another week, they departed. And as we had expected all along, within 3 days, Homer Barron was back in town. A neighbor saw the Negro man admit him at the kitchen door at dusk one evening. And that was the last we saw of Homer Barron and of Miss Emily for some time. The Negro man went in and out with the market basket, but the front door remained closed. Now and then we would see her at a window for a moment, as the men did that night when they sprinkled the lime, but for almost 6 months, she did not appear on the streets. Then we knew that this was to be expected too, as if the quality of her father, which had thwarted her woman's life so many times, had been too virulent and too furious to die. When we next saw Miss Emily, she had grown fat and her hair was turning gray. During the next few years, it grew grayer and grayer until it attained an even pepper and salt iron gray when it ceased turning. Up to the day of her death at 74, it was still that vigorous iron gray, like the hair of an active man. From that time on, her front door remained closed, save for a period of 6 or 7 years when she was about 40, during which she gave lessons in china painting. She fitted up a studio in one of the downstairs rooms where the daughters and granddaughters of Colonel Sartoris's contemporaries were sent to her with the same regularity and in the same spirit that they were sent to church on Sundays, with a 25-cent piece for the collection plate. Meanwhile, her taxes had been remitted. Then the newer generation became the backbone and the spirit of the town, and the painting pupils grew up and fell away and did not send their children to her with boxes of color and tedious brushes and pictures cut from the ladies' magazines. The front door closed upon the last one and remained closed for good. When the town got free postal delivery, Miss Emily alone refused to let them fasten the metal numbers above her door and attach a mailbox to it. She would not listen to them. Daily, monthly, yearly, we watched the Negro grow grayer and more stooped, going in and out with the market basket. Each December, we sent her tax notice, which would be returned by the post office a week later, unclaimed. Now and then we would see her in one of the downstairs windows. She'd evidently shut up the top floor of the house, like the carven torso of an idol in a niche, looking or not looking at us. We could never tell which. Thus she passed from generation to generation, dear, inescapable, impervious, tranquil, and perverse. And so she died, fell ill in the house, filled with dust and shadows, with only a doddering Negro man to wait on her. We did not even know that she was sick. We had long since given up trying to get any information from the Negro. He talked to no one, probably not even to her, for his voice had grown harsh and rusty, as if from disuse. She died in one of the downstairs rooms in a heavy walnut bed with a curtain, her gray head propped up on a pillow, yellow and moldy with age and lack of sunlight. So it seems like that should be the end of the story. She's dead now. She had a very sad life, never, well, maybe got married, but like didn't, if she did get married, her husband didn't stay with her. He just kind of like disappeared. Her only real family was her dad, and he died, and she's just been like a shut-in for all this time, almost like agoraphobic kind of thing. So now that she's dead, what more can there be of the story? Well, let's find out in part 5. The Negro met the first of the ladies at the front door and let them in with their hushed, sibilant voices and their quick, curious glances, and then he disappeared. He walked right through the house and out the back and was not seen again. The 2 female cousins came at once. They held the funeral on the second day, with the town coming to look at Miss Emily beneath a mass of bought flowers, with the crayon face of her father musing profoundly above the bier, and the ladies sibilant and macabre, and the very old men, some in their brushed Confederate uniforms, on the porch and the lawn, talking of Miss Emily as if she had been a contemporary of theirs, believing they had danced with her and courted her perhaps, confusing time with its mathematical progression, as the old do, to whom all the past is not a diminishing road, but instead a huge meadow which no winter ever quite touches, divided from them now by the narrow bottleneck of the most recent decade of years. Already we knew that there was one room in that region above the stairs which no one had seen in 40 years and which would have to be forced. They waited until Miss Emily was decently in the ground before they opened it. The violence of breaking down the door seemed to fill this room with pervading dust. A thin, acrid pall, as of the tomb, seemed to lie everywhere upon this room, decked and furnished as for a bridal. Upon the valance, the curtains of faded rose color, upon the rose-shaded lights, upon the dressing table, upon the delicate array of crystal and the man's toilet things backed with tarnished silver, silver so tarnished that the monogram was obscured. Among them lay a collar and tie as if they'd just been removed, which left upon the surface a pale crescent in the dust. Upon a chair hung the suit, carefully folded. Beneath it, the 2 mute shoes and the discarded socks. The man himself lay in the bed. For a long while, we just stood there, looking down at the profound and fleshless grin. The body had apparently once lain in the attitude of an embrace, but now the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquered even the grimace of love, had cuckolded him. What was left of him, rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt, had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay, and upon him and upon the pillow beside him lay that even coating of the patient and biting dust. Then we noticed that in the second pillow was the indentation of a head. One of us lifted something from it, and leaning forward, that faint and invisible dust, dry and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron gray hair. The end. So the story is kind of crazy at the end because you just really don't see this coming, that like, you think that she is just like this kind of sad old lady who never really had any luck and didn't have anybody really in her life for a very long time. But at the end, we're able to kind of put together all of this other stuff, like the stuff about how there was a smell around the house and how Homer Barron had disappeared. And then like after she dies, they go upstairs into the room that no one's entered in 40 years, supposedly, and his body is there. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, the rat poison. So it's almost like kind of a, if I can't have you, nobody can have you kind of thing. And it sounds like she was cuddling with his dead body because it's got his her iron gray hair on the pillow next to his corpse. Creepy ending, but I like it. Honestly, that's why I like this story. It feels like it's not going to be creepy. but then there's just this really unsettling thing about the end. So actually I shouldn't have stopped sharing my screen with you because I wanted to point out a couple of things. Like I said, you're going to be kind of comparing this and Hills Like White Elephants tomorrow, Hemingway versus Faulkner. And I do. I still have Hills Like White Elephants open. If you even just looking at Hills Like White Elephants, dialogue, short sentences, short paragraphs. The whole thing takes place over, a few minutes in one place, whereas A Rose for Emily takes place over the course of like 50 years or more. It jumps back and forth in time. It's not linear, which we also talked about when I introduced modernism to you guys. That's definitely a thing that is very characteristic of modernist literature, this non-linear timeline, flashing back, going forward. Even the fact that this short story is put in 5 different parts, that's pretty experimental for the time. Like you won't have really seen a thing like that before. But even just looking at the sentences, obviously like the paragraphs are a good bit longer than the ones from the Hemingway story. But there were a couple of times when I was reading and I looked and I was like, wow, I'm still on the same sentence and I've been on the same sentence for a while. And the example that I noticed there at the end, all of this is one sentence. You've got a semicolon in there, you've got some dashes, and that doesn't mean it's a run-on sentence, it's all correct, but it's just super long. I mean, look at that. They held the funeral on the second day with the town coming to look at Miss Emily beneath a mass of bought flowers with the crayon face of her father musing profoundly above the bier and the ladies sibilant and macabre. And the very old men, some in their brushed Confederate uniforms, on the porch and the lawn, talking of Miss Emily as if she had been a contemporary of theirs, believing that they had danced with her and courted her perhaps, confusing time with its mathematical progression as the old do, to whom all the past is not a diminishing road, but instead a huge meadow which no winter ever quite touches, divided from them now by the narrow bottleneck of the most recent decade of years. One sentence, that's one sentence, out of control. So that's the thing that you're going to want to keep in mind tomorrow as you're kind of comparing these two. Think about what the stories are actually about, content-wise, sentence structure and length, amount of dialogue used, whether the timelines are linear or not, use of different forms and structures, and anything else that you can think of. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And now that you guys kind of know what your, at least kind of what your assignment is for tomorrow, if you need to go back between now and then and look at either of the 2 stories, you've got time to do that. I don't think it'll be a terribly long assignment tomorrow, but you do have to turn that in. And if you have not yet submitted an Imagist poem, make sure that you get that submitted. Any questions?
How do I shorten my Imagist poem? Because I can't find a way to do that.
Okay. I mean, to be fair, I already graded yours because it was turned in on time. I think even your next to last sentence, my sense of taste disappeared and all I could feel in my mouth were dead words. I think you could half that because it kind of means the same thing. I would keep the second half. All I could feel in my mouth were dead words. I like that. And then it's still like a little long, but I don't really know what else you could change. I'll just put it in lines.
Okay.
All right. Well, we still have like 10 minutes, but I think we'll just call it a day. And we'll concentrate on these stories tomorrow. See ya.
Okay, bye.